Okay, so for this video, we want to understand how do we comply with the objectives stated in each AUC section. And that's at AUC section 200.23 here. And it says to achieve the overall objectives of the auditor should use the objectives stated in individual AUC sections in planning and performing the audit, considering the interrelationships within GAAS. And doing that, you should determine whether any audit procedures in addition to those required by individual AUC sections are necessary in pursuance of the objectives stated in each AUC section, and you should evaluate whether sufficient appropriate audit evidence has been obtained. So what does this mean? Fortunately, we have some interpretive guidance here that we can go down to. So let's go down to those interpretations and additional information. Okay, so here we have the other explanatory material and how to comply with the objectives that are stated in individual AUC sections. So each section has one or more objectives that is our overarching goal in applying that particular section. So it links the requirements to that particular goal. So in providing those objectives here, the ASB hopes that will help us understand what needs to be accomplished and when necessary the appropriate means of doing so. And I also hope that it helps us decide whether more needs to be done to achieve the objectives in particular circumstances of the audit. So they remind us here that we want to achieve the objectives, but we also understand that there are inherent limitations to doing an audit, and those limitations are discussed in another video. But so in using these objectives, the auditor also needs to understand the interrelationships between the AUC sections, because some of these objectives will apply to several sections, and they may not be mentioned in the other sections. So for instance, in this particular AUC section 200 that we're going through now, there's a requirement for professional skepticism. And now in every AUC section, it doesn't mention professional skepticism, but even so, we still have to exercise the attitude of professional skepticism throughout the other AUC sections and throughout the audit overall. But they don't repeat that requirement in every AUC section. So there's some other sections as well that should be applied to other AUC sections. For instance, sections 315 and 330 discuss assessing the risk of material misstatement. And a lot of these requirements should be performed in other AUC sections as well, but may not be mentioned in those other sections. So there's a couple more here, examples that they provide that you need to consider the interrelationships between a lot of the AUC sections. And so if one particular item is not mentioned in another section, it doesn't mean that another section has said that this particular requirement needs to be provided or performed throughout the entirety of the audit or in other sections. So going down here, the objectives, or rather the requirements in each of these AUC sections, the ASB hoped that performing these requirements, the auditor would be able to achieve the objectives stated in each AUC section. But there are different types of audits and different scenarios where maybe these requirements may not meet the objectives of this AUC section. So since our overarching goal of doing the audit is to achieve the objectives in each relevant AUC section, we may need to do some additional procedures that aren't necessarily a requirement in an effort to achieve those objectives that are stated. And so if the auditor believes he hasn't achieved sufficient and appropriate evidence to meet the objective in that AUC section, he should evaluate whether further relevant audit evidence has been or will be obtained as a result of complying with other AUC sections. So other sections may get us the information we need to comply with this particular AUC section. They may also need to extend the work performed in applying one or more requirements. So maybe one of these requirements to achieve the objective, the auditor might need to perform more in relation to that particular requirement to achieve the objective. He also may need to perform other procedures that may not necessarily be a requirement, but he should do those procedures in order to achieve the objectives. And if he's not able to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence, even after exploring each of these options, he may have to determine the effect on the auditor's report or his ability to complete the engagement. So he may need to qualify his report or withdraw from the engagement entirely.